Good morning, everyone. So I hope that you're able to enjoy the food outside and the coffee, right? So just to expound on Boss Dino's point a while ago, no? So when we were planning this about a month ago, it was just mostly, the market, global markets have been outperforming, right, the last few years. And in contrast, the Philippine market, nothing's really happening. So we only just wanted to have this event to basically answer the question: should we all, as investors, start to invest outside, look outside, and look for opportunity outside, instead of maintaining our local position. So that was the plan, right? And of course, what happened the last few days was the bonus, right? And now it's the elephant in the room, right? Um, and so I hope that basically with the recent events, this event just became more exciting, and not only that, but also more useful and more timely and more insightful for you guys. All right. So today's format will be more of a discussion, Q&A format between our experts here. So we have our two experts who will share their views on both the local and the global markets. And so for that, April, Melvin, thank you for joining us today. All right, so let's go right into it. For our first question, so I want to start with Melvin, of course, because that's what everybody wants to know, right? So first, what is happening in the global markets, and what's your outlook for the global markets in general?
Okay, so what's happening in the global markets? I think the biggest event that's happening right now is a tariff war, no? So a few days ago, what Donald Trump did is nag-impose siya ng tariff across the world, no? So halos lahat ng bansa tinamaan doon, no? But just before the start of this discussion, no, nagkukwentuhan kami ni Charles and April that do you know that the tariff, 'di ba? If you look at Facebook, may isang chart palagi doon, 'di ba? Yun at the middle, yung nakalagay doon na tariff na ini-impose ng bansa, 'di ba? So I just like to make a correction. That's not tariff, ah. So inimbento lang ng ano 'yon, ng administration ng Trump. In fact, ano 'yon? The formula there is total deficit over total US import. So anong nangyari doon is if a country is exporting more or importing more sa US, okay, so therefore, kung ano man yon, okay, yun ang inimpose niya na tariff. Yun ang nangyari doon. Okay, so some people started asking me, fair naman pala si Trump eh. Yung Philippines, inimpose niya ng tariff, pero nagcha-charge pala tayo ng 34, no? So hindi totoo yun, hindi totoo yun. Yung 34 is not a tariff that we impose on the US goods, ah. That's not true. Okay? Now, having said that, okay, so if you know the word crisis in Chinese, okay, crisis composes of two words, danger, but more importantly, opportunity. Okay, so isipin nyo palagi yon. In any crisis, there's danger, but more importantly, there's opportunity. Okay, so what I want you to think now is, look at 2020. So noong 2020, nung nagka-pandemic, di ba, feeling nyo, shit, end of the world na. Ay, sorry for that. Live pala ako, no? Masyado ko naging comfortable, no? So, parang end of the world na, di ba? Hindi na tayo makalabas, right? So, bumagsak yung market. And then eventually, a few days after, nag-recover very well, correct? Sasabihin nyo sa sarili nyo, sayang, sana nakapasok ako. Tama, no? Okay. So, nagdasal ka, sana makapasok ka, no? Hindi ka nakapasok. Now, guess what? Nag-grant yung wish mo. Yung prayer mo, nag-grant. Pinagbigyan ka ulit ng 2022 nung naggera yung Russia at Ukraine. Tama? Bumagsak na naman yung market. Guess what? Feeling mo World War III. Hindi ka na naman pumasok. Tama? Guess what? Ngayon, binigyan ka na naman ng chance. So, ang question, nung papasok ka ba o hindi? Now, of course, I cannot tell you whether the market will still further go down. Ang point lang dito is, it may be a good time to start considering looking at that market already. So I'm not saying na, hindi, pasok na tayo bukas lahat, but maybe something na you can start considering adding already. Yan.
All right, so before I ask follow-up questions, so I'm gonna go to the Philippines first, right? So in light of that, and also even outside of that, what's the view naman on the local markets on the Philippines, April?
Okay, thank you, Charles. So, I think, medyo sawang-sawa na kayo sa akin. Uh, but, I mean, during the start of the year, I came out with a contrarian view, I would think, because at the time, I felt like almost everybody was bearish on the Philippines. But then I said, for the first time, I became positive on the Philippines, and I am maintaining that very positive view, and all the more today, because first of all, my view on the GDP is still very good. It's very positive because first of all, inflation is on the way down. In January, we didn't know yet, but today, as of yesterday, we already had inflation for 3 months. And, it's been trending down, and rice prices are actually down by 7.7%, no? That was what was disclosed. And given that, we know that, the masses would now have more money to spend. So that's good on economic growth. And of course, with falling inflation comes lower interest rates, which would be good for businesses. And we also have the midterm elections in May, and that would put money in people's pockets. So better economic growth. Aside from that, the important thing is, since uso ngayon ng puro tariffs, yes, we have a 17% tariff from the US, but relative to everybody else in Asia, it is very low. Only Singapore is lower, but if you think about it, Singapore really isn't a competitor when it comes to goods, because they are more of a services-oriented economy. So with a 17% tariff, it makes us cheaper. No, it is an opportunity, and it may in fact encourage some companies to consider investing in the Philippines. And finally, yun na nga, I think unlike the US, na has been performing very strongly the past 2 years, the Philippines has not. Therefore, if you look at valuations, yun na nga, wala namang positivity yung mga tao eh. Let's say may sinabing bad news. Sabi nyo, so what's new? 'Di ba? We already expected that anyway. 'Di ba? It's more like pagka may magandang balita, 'di ba parang, oh, talaga? Sigurado kayo? Ganun, 'di ba? Mas ganun ng So that's what I want to say, negative surprise in. So if there's something bad that comes out, so what's new? It's more like if something good comes out, then mas may upside siya. Unlike the US, everybody's expecting, hindi, nag-20 plus yan the past 2 years. Dapat this year, 20 plus pa rin, diba? Tapos yun nga, nung may tariff, o di, syempre, laki ng binaba, na-surprise yung tao.
Yeah. All right. So everything is relative to expectation. Parang life talaga in general. All right. Okay. I have a few questions. No? So first for Melvin. So you mentioned you view this. We should, and I agree 100% that we should view this more as an opportunity also, right? Not just risk. But at the same time, we don't know, as you mentioned also, how this would play out. Like how long it would take, how low it could go. So what's the right approach, at least in the near term, right? Do we have to, like, bibili na ba kami on Monday, or do we move our funds out from local to global, or do we wait for a few more things to happen before we start getting in the market? So
Yeah. So there's two very important dates that we need to note. No? So one is April 5. So today, because may mga countries na sinabi nila, today sila mag-a-announce ng retaliation nila. So we need to check ano ba yung gagawin nila and so on and so forth. And the second one would be the April 9. So yung April 9 kasi is when the tariff will set in place. No? So if you look at what happened nung ginawa niya kay Canada and Mexico, ganun din ang ginawa niya, di ba nagbigay siya ng extra time eh. No? And then at the last minute, nagbago isip niya, in-extend niya. So from now until April 9, there's gonna be a lot of things that will happen. Okay, so that's one. And Charles, when we talk about global kasi, I just wanted to make the correction that when you talk about global, it's not just US. Most of the time, feeling natin, global US, global US. Understandable because US is the biggest market. But remember, global is not just US. You have China there, you have Europe there, and so on and so forth. So the opportunity may not necessarily be all in the US, there may be some opportunities now in China, considering that from 2021 all the way to 2023, it also did not perform. So ngayon pa lang siya bumababa. So some market that you can consider. Europe is also there. No, they've already tamed their inflation already. So yun ang point ko. When you look at global, do not just focus on US. Now, with regards to timing, sa akin, I always prefer that, I will not purely stay on the sideline. I will start considering, but the keyword there is slowly. Slowly. So wag lahat, slowly try to go to the market. Yan.
So just to quickly add to your point on the, as a negotiation with the different countries, I believe last night I saw that like the Vietnam said that they're willing to cut tariffs to the US, right? In hopes of getting a lower tariff in return. So it's really a negotiation. That's your point, right? But I'd like to ask though, because you mentioned like China, right? And we know that China, the start of the year, also, went up also. So what are your thoughts on China? How would China be affected in all of these trade war? Hindi ba rin sila yung nasa center ng trade war? What do you think would happen?
Yes, siyempre si China is also one of the biggest economy that will get hit by the tariff. And that's a given, no? In fact, more or less that will eat up about 2% of their GDP. So that's going to be a lot, right? So what China is now doing is for the longest time, hindi pa nila nilalabas yung bagay yung ammunition nila. Exactly because hindi nila alam kung anong gagawin ni Donald Trump. Now that nangyayari na to, no, you will expect in the next coming months, in the next coming weeks, China will start, announcing their bazookas, no, their way to prime the economy again. So that's on the China side, no. And second, what's very interesting is if you look at the trading partners of US, most of the time ang unang iniisip natin it's China, di ba? China ang pinakamalaki. Now, that was true before 2018. That was true before 2018. So, noong 2018, bago nag-away si Trump tsaka si China, siya talaga ang pinakamalaki. But do you know that, ladies and gentlemen, today, ang laki na ng binagsak ng trade ng China sa US? In fact, the number one trading partner of US now is actually Mexico. So, Mexico and Canada. Now, ang difference ni Mexico and Canada compared to China, Mexico and Canada is highly dependent on the US. So, I'll give you an example. Si Mexico, no? Out of 100% na ine-export niya sa buong mundo, 75% doon is just US. Si Mexico is 82, si Europe is about 75.
Yeah.
Si Canada is about 75. So, ganun sila ka-dependent sa US. But China is not that big anymore. It used to be, but it has significantly cut down already his dependency on the US market.
All right. I'd like to go back first again on the US because again, it's the biggest market. So with all these even before all the tariffs, no, we're seeing some slowdown in economic activity in the US. With these tariffs in place, what do you think would happen to their economic growth? Do you anticipate a recession? Is it inevitable? Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, in fact, almost of certainty, if this pushes through, US will undergo a recession. So almost of certainty na yon. Now, if you look at an environment when there is a recession, what's the number one asset that goes down? It's actually the equities. Kaya nga sinasabi ko sa inyo, the key word here is if you're starting to go and expose yourself in the global market, the keyword is slowly go in. Slowly go in. Yung pinapakita natin chart, that was before the tariff war. So, bawasan nyo lahat ng 2% yan. Okay? So, ganun ka update, ganun ka fresh yung news na pinag-uusapan natin ngayon. So, minus yan 2% lahat yan. Because more or less, that's the impact of the trade war now. Okay? Now, having said that, if the US will undergo a recession, so the biggest asset that will be on a disadvantage is the equity market because not only that it will go down, it will experience the highest volatility. So, pag recession siya may pinakamataas sa volatility. Now, in a recession environment, meron din isang very important characteristic nangyari doon. Ano yun? Yung interest rate, sigurado babagsak yan na malaki. Bakit? Kasi ang recession is walang movement, di ba? Walang mataas yung unemployment mo. So they will now encourage companies to, jumpstart, hire more employees, etc. How do they do that? By lowering interest rate. So they will now encourage companies to borrow, etc., etc. Now, if you lower your interest rate, there's one asset that will do very well. Okay, alam nyo kung ano yun? The bond market. So bonds is something that you can also consider to add in your portfolio. Yan.
Okay, sige, I'll cut you off at that point first. We'll get back into that later on. But I'll go to the Philippines first. April, you mentioned a while ago that the Philippines will be less affected by the
Yes.
trade war or the tariffs. Can you expound on this? Why do you believe so? And yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I think, well, we can look at this chart, but kanina si Melvin had a more detailed chart showing the differential of the tariffs. So tayo, 17%. Okay, let me just take a look at this, no? Me and my bad eyesight. So China, for example, okay, ang tariff sa China is 34, but we do have other Asian countries like Vietnam where the tariff is 46%. Okay, so tayo 17, ang next lowest or the only other Asian country na mas mababa is Singapore. But then as I discussed, Singapore doesn't really export anything na goods, 'di ba? Or kung meron man konting-konti, which is why nga 10% lang ang nilagay sa kanya. But if you look at it, all of our competitors are taxed or tariffed at a much higher rate. So, kung ako, buyer from the US, isipin ko, dito na lang ako sa mas mababang tariff because the other one has a higher tariff. Parang ano yan price differential. 'Di ba? Mas mahal, nagiging mas mahal sila. So, magiging mas mura tayo relative to the other Asian countries. And if we go back to Trump 1.0, what happened? 'Di ba? Because of the Trump kasi before was targeting China. What happened? So a lot of the companies, they put up manufacturing facilities in other friendlier countries, mga friendshoring, which explains why, di ba, Mexico became a bigger source of US imports. Vietnam as well, I think. Yung mga iba, dun sila nagpunta, or even Thailand, Indonesia. Unfortunately, we weren't able to benefit. But, I don't know if it will happen, but at least, diba, during the start of the year, I also talked about my excitement towards the passage of the Create More Act. At least now we're in a better position to accept these foreign direct investments. Mas friendly na yung environment. So, if there are companies that may want to think about investing more in the Philippines to capitalize on the lower relative tariffs, at least, nandyan tayo. We're open for business.
I think I saw in the news a few days ago that FDI went up 100% year over year, parang ganyan. So there's
Yeah.
some early signs.
Yeah, that's from the Create More Act pa lang yan Oo, na
Yeah.
naghihintay
Not
sila.
this one.
Yes, not even this one. So, think about it, no, if we add this one. Yun na nga. And aside from that, I think they're showing how, in general, the Philippines is not we're not a net exporting country. We're a net importer. So, total exports, gross exports to the US is 2.7% of GDP. So, yeah, yan ang vulnerable na tamaan. But to think, is it gonna be dropping to zero? I don't think so. Because the only way that it will drop to zero is if the US can produce 100% of what is being exported, which at this point I don't think is the case. So, relatively speaking, the impact on the GDP is not going to be as much.
And in contrast, just to add context again, like Vietnam, the last 2 days, they fell I think over 10% the last 2 days. And that's because, number one, tariff nila 40 plus percent.
47.
And at the same time, their exports to the US versus the 2.7% that you mentioned is 30% of their GDP. 30% of their
Gross
GDP.
to US
Yes.
pa lang.
So
Oo.
just imagine if that one, falls even half or 30%, that's 10% of GDP. Here, even if we fall like even the exports fall by
It's
half,
8%, yeah.
that's only
Oo.
a
1%.
percentage point, right? So much
Mas-
better place. Simply because, so ironically, no, medyo ironic, no, dahil hindi tayo magaling mag-export, I mean, so hindi rin tayo tatamaan, di ba? So, of course, some of our clients here might be in the exporting business, so of course, that's unfortunate, but at least overall, in terms of the country, relatively more resilient, less impacted.
Yes.
All right. Okay. So another thing that you talked about is the interest rates, inflation finally going down, right? So can you do you think that this will still happen in light of the recent events, or does it change? Does the recent events change anything? You think the U.S. Fed, for example, number one, are we still following or waiting for the U.S. Fed to cut rates before we cut? And what are your thoughts on that?
Um, okay, so I think yan ang medyo controversial. I mean, I've been talking to a lot of people, and some people are actually worried kasi they're thinking, hala, because of the tariffs, of course, inflation in the US will go up. And therefore, the Fed will tighten even more. Um, but, that said, well, first of all, meron ngang tinatawag na, di ba, inflation is a continuous increase in prices. Um, so we talked about Powell already mentioning, uh, the word transitory. Kasi unless every year Trump will impose more and more tariffs, then you will have inflation. But if it's a one-time thing, then it's a one-time adjustment. Then secondly, of course, that is assuming na pag tinaas niya yung presyo, bibili ka pa rin. But since your income is not increasing, di ba ngayon nga, the likelihood of a recession is going up. What happens in a recession? Wala ka trabaho. So if you lose your job and the prices go up, you will buy less. Di ba? You just focus on, That's why if you look at the commodity prices, instead of going up because of the tariffs, they're actually going down. Di ba? And the bond rates seem to be implying na no, inflation is not a problem. It's gonna be more deflationary because of the weaker economic growth. And aside from that, there are some things that I would like to highlight that could possibly lead to lower inflation. So remember, one of the things that President Trump is doing is yung mga Doge cost-cutting efforts, di ba? The government is spending less because it is trying to prepare for the tax cut. So, bawasan muna natin yung mga gastusin natin. And then, before this, ano ba yung mainit na balita, 'di ba? The meeting of President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine. So, syempre, it looks like he doesn't want to spend on the Russia-Ukraine war anymore, and it could mean that we could see the end of that because if not for the US, I don't think Ukraine can support an ongoing war. Even Europe cannot sustain the spending. And, as I've talked about earlier, US recession, and then Trump talking about drill, baby drill, or supporting more spending on oil. By the way, guys, no, in case you didn't know, ang oil below $70 a barrel na, nasa 64 na lang ngayon. So baka sa Tuesday may downward price adjustment tayo. And then the peso from 57 plus, I think nasa 56 na. So there are signs na, it's more of lower inflation, lower interest rates rather than higher inflation. And of course, yun na nga, the expected weakness in the global economy and something that everybody's been excited about, AI. Higher productivity due to AI. That's actually good for inflation. It'll bring inflation down. So those are the factors why I think it's, I'm more on the camp of lower inflation, lower interest rates. And yes, bonds seem to be very interesting at this point.
All right. Okay. So for my next question, so we mentioned already a lot of things, but what else are we closely monitoring going forward? Like, what events or catalysts are we like anticipating in the coming weeks or months that could have a significant impact on the local and global markets? So, Melvin, I'll start with you.
Actually, sobrang dami, no? But yung first is the
Biggest
mention,
ones lang.
what I mentioned is earlier yung, are the countries going to retaliate or negotiate? So yun ang pinaka big thing talaga. Now, to add what April mentioned earlier, so if you look at what's happening in the US, so ang palagi natin nakikita was the tariff war, right? But what a lot of people fail to notice is that there's something that President Trump also mentioned in that talk, no? And what is that? That was the TCJA, no? I think that's slide number 5. Slide number 5, yeah, there. So what a lot of people do not know, yung 2017, the reason why the US market went up very much, in the next so many years, up yung market, because of the TCJA. The TCJA is the tax cut job of 2017. The tax cut job, ginawa niya, binaba niya yung tax ng corporate at ang daming ginawa niyang, tinaas niya yung deduction ng mga individual payers. So that alone significantly increased the spending power of the masses, of the people, no? So ngayon, mag-expire ng 2025 and because si Trump eksakto yung naging president, so they are now working on making sure that this becomes permanent. So yes, ang daming nangyaring negative sa US, but remember, mayroon din mga ganitong klaseng items na ginagawa nila that actually creates increase in spending power by the people and so on and so forth, making the country more resilient, etc., etc. So ito, pag nangyari to, that will help reverse the market. Yeah. So yan yung isa sa mga significant dyan.
So just a question before I go to April, no? So, di ba when Trump was elected, we all know that the US market rallied significantly. Do you think that they're already like in a way like pricing this one in that rally? And so basically my question is it already expected that they're gonna, or are you expecting Trump to announce even bigger cuts?
This one, in fact, ang pinag-usapan, kasi there's two version, no? So the one in the Senate version it's even bigger cut. In fact, you can see the highest, di ba, in corporate tax. So from 35 to 21, ano nangyari? Nag-rally talaga noong 2018, noong 2017, di ba? So now, not only that they will make this permanent, they will even further reduce it to 15%. And yung mga exemption dyan, yung standard deduction, lahat yan, itataas pa nila lahat. So, I think this one will significantly help the market, no, reverse going up.
Okay, very interesting, very interesting. Definitely, we need to monitor that.
Yeah, and by the way, Charles, ang target nila dito is May and June.
May and June,
May and
around
June.
May and June.
Around May and June.
Not far away.
Yeah. Exciting.
All right, sige, I'll go to the local market first. So, April, on the local side, what are you looking at? What are you waiting for? What's the catalyst that could potentially be impacted?
It's still interest rates, I think. Because right now, earlier on we talked about the cheap valuations. Pero of course, cheap valuations will not drive your market higher. But that said, okay, ang gusto ko lang sabihin is, the participation is so low. Which is why, remember yung mga nag-active trading sa atin last year, we saw a significant rally in the market from May to October. And if you ask people like, why? What's the catalyst? What's the reason? Nobody knows. They're just gonna say, kasi interest rates in the US went down, in the secondary market, the peso strengthened. And then all of a sudden, everybody turned bullish. Tapos nung bumaba yung market, biglang naging bearish lahat. So anyway, if you think about it, it's just really liquidity. Wala sobra ng nipis ng liquidity that, konting galaw lang, mabilis umakyat yung market. And that said, right now, one of the reasons why people aren't buying the market is because, pwede pa silang mag-place ng mataas eh.
Yeah.
Diba? So, place na lang ako, nasa 6% naman, ba't pa ako mag-invest sa stock market? Sasakit pa ulo ko, paano kung di umakyat? Yun. But if, interest rates go down, if the Fed becomes more aggressive, again, earlier this year, people were anticipating the Fed to cut rates by only 25 basis points. But now, I mean, we just checked earlier, the expectation is the Fed or the market is pricing in a 100 basis point cut already in the Fed rates. Ngayon, si BSP, we're only a price taker naman eh. If the Fed cuts, di magkakat din si BSP. Gagayahin lang naman niya. If that happens, most likely the bond rates will go down. Interest rates that banks are offering for time deposits will also go down, making the stock market a lot more attractive. So for me, that's a very important catalyst, especially right now. We have so many stocks that are giving us cash dividends north of 4 to 5%. So that will really become very attractive for investors, I think.
Okay. Melvin, follow-up question on your end. You mentioned you're waiting for what the other countries would do, how they would react, di ba? What do you think? How would they react? Would they, like, ano ba, lahat ba ito ma-reverse in 3 months, I don't know. I mean, what do you think would happen?
Well, actually, from now until April 9, sigurado ko ang dami na mangyari. Di ba? But whether they will retaliate or negotiate, well, China definitely already said that they are retaliating. But you know, at the end of the day, they will all go down to negotiate. At the end of the day, pupunta at pupunta pa rin dyan. Kasi ang gusto lang naman ni Trump is he just want to win something. No? So at the end of the day, I think that a lot of the countries will prefer to negotiate than to retaliate. And that's why I expect that eventually, the moment that they start negotiating and so on and so forth, you know, market will start to stabilize and eventually even reverse. No? So if you look at the list ng lahat ng countries, di ba? So ano napansin nyo? Wala si Canada at saka si Mexico, correct? So bakit wala si Canada at si Mexico? Kasi they're already negotiating. So it's actually a sign na Trump, yes, ang purpose ng tariff is 3 things. No? Number 1 is as a political weapon to bring back the companies in the US, and yung third is to generate income. But if you really think about it, ang pinaka talagang gusto talaga niyan is the negotiation part. Yun talaga ang pinaka gusto niya. So I think this will also be fast, no? I don't think it will stay until end of the year. No, I'm sure every country is now in a hurry to negotiate with the US market.
All right. So when I woke up this morning, so I saw a video of Howard Marks, so one of my idols, no, so of Oak Tree Capital, no, so he was being interviewed by Bloomberg, and basically he said that the recent tariffs by Trump is the biggest, or marks the biggest change in the environment probably in his career. That's what he said. Right? So basically, his point was, for the last 80 years, the U.S. market, parang golden time for the U.S. market, di ba? Kasi, and a main, after the World War II, and a main driver of that is global trade. Di ba? So, if you look at the last, basically 80 years, generally prices have always been going down, and they've always increased their dependencies on other countries. Kasi offshoring, kaya cheaper goods lagi. So, of course, that also led to all of their deficits now, all of their, diba, the deficits now. But at the same time, they also benefited in terms of lower prices. And so, Howard Mark was saying na this move creates an uncertainty, diba, going for what would happen. So my question is, do you think that this, broad-based tariff implementation, is it an inflection point for that, inflection point ba siya na going forward, wala, talaga, individualization na, deglobalization na, that diba, will there be a structural change? I know, it's a very difficult question, but what are your thoughts on that?
Sabi ko nga kahapon, nako, bakit kaya sa akin napunta yung global? Okay, so, that's a very good point, no? Basta isipin nyo palagi ganito. At the end of the day, do not expect that things will go back on the way it was. So, wag nyo isipin na, it's just purely for negotiation. At the end of the day, yung tatlong sinabi ko sa inyong goal ni Donald Trump, lahat yan mangyayari. It's just a matter of anong pinaka-biggest weight, no? So, at the end of the day, anong mga nine-negotiate ni Donald Trump? Ang nine-negotiate ni Donald Trump is bring back manufacturing in the US. Now, whether that is a correct move or not, that is definitely going to be one of the biggest negotiation there. Okay? So, having said that, So we expect, tama, inflation will go down, but do not expect inflation to go down as low as what it used to be before. Okay, so kung dati easily we can hit 2%, baka ngayon, baka 2 to 2.5 na lang. Baka medyo mas mataas na. Exactly because of this movement, because of this direction, babalik at babalik a big part of manufacturing in the US. Yan.
All right. Okay. Good answers. Somewhere in the middle. So, yeah, but, okay. All right, great.
Pang Miss Universe.
Oh, pang Miss Universe. No? But you're able to answer it naman. Okay, so let's go to the Philippine market. No? So you mentioned rate cuts, and I think that's very important. Kasi I don't think that's only true for just for individuals, but also even for the corporates, right? For the fund managers, right? Ganyan din sila. Ngayon, bonds na lang muna sila, overweight bonds muna sila. So my question is, if that happens, diba? If let's say the US cuts rates 100 bips, right? Doesn't that also mean that they're in a recession and the S&P probably also fell and won't we also be dragged down by that?
Yeah, I think, 2022 pa natin pinag-usapan yan. Meron bang decoupling?
Yeah,
Well,
please
obviously wala. 'Di ba? Ngayon, I think that question has been answered that sorry, there's no decoupling happening. But, that said, what's interesting if you ask me, in the past kasi, when we entered into a bear market, since I started working, we had two bear markets in the Philippines, the Asian financial crisis and the global financial crisis. When those bear markets happened, we were at a high level. We were trading at double-digit multiples. Yun na nga, tsaka kung tignan natin, like the Asian financial crisis, there was a lot of excess. And bank NPLs shot up. Banks were, naalala ko dati, maniwala ka ba, loans to deposit ratio dati, 120%. Ngayon, nasaan? Sagutin mo, Charles. 70, 80, diba? In other words, the liquidity is so much there. Banks are so happy. They're so happily capitalized. Tapos, diba, parang iba kasi tapos nandyan, nalaglag na yung market. So, I think that's the main difference. Yes, most likely we will still go down or we won't go up. But the thing is, here we saw, for example, during the past, we would drop by 30, 40%, diba? Parang malaki. But this time around, baka hindi. Because, we're already down there. I think I have a few slides there where I show how our earnings are actually 20% higher na compared to pre-pandemic level there. So our profits, corporate profits are higher by 20%, but you can see that our share price for the PSEI is still down by 22% right now. So, 'di ba? Kaya nga ang mura, nandun na tayo sa bear market valuation. So, that said, I mean, that's what's different. Maybe we will not decouple, maybe we will not go up, but at least, kasi I think another thing na tinitignan ko pagka masama yung market, diba? Remember, one of the things that I always ask you guys to see is, can you check the debt to equity levels, lumpy maturities, etc. And this time around, parang malakas sila malakas ang corporates which is why they are all paying cash dividends. 'Di ba? And doing share buybacks kasi ang lalakas ng mga company unlike before nung Asian financial crisis. Sila parang tagilid talaga, 'di ba? And then they borrowed US dollar debts. The risk of bankruptcy was very high, but this time around we're not seeing that. So yeah, I mean if you're buying Philippine stocks today, I think the conviction is much stronger. It's more of a waiting game, like how long do I have to wait before prices go up?
Okay. So you mentioned kasi decoupling and lagi nga natin pinag-usapan. So I also want to share my quick thoughts also, no. So you mentioned already a while ago that decoupling could be in terms of magnitude, Baka mahulog sila, baka tayo less. Kasi nga, lower expectations. No? Secret to life, low expectations. Or even no expectations. Even better, right? So, but, okay. So, seriously speaking though. But also, for me, another element to that is if we zoom out, okay? Zoom out, longer time horizon, I would argue that decoupling has already happened. So, look back the last 12 years. The last 12 is since 2013. The US market has, what, tripled the last 12 years. But the Philippine market, what, down 10%? Right? So there's a decoupling, right? Over the long term. So maybe if the US market falls by 10% next week, we would fall, yes, no decoupling. But maybe over the next 12 months, maybe possible, right? If, let's say, diba, to outperform, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, sorry Melvin hindi naman ako global expert or what. Pero, ang US lang, just to put things into context, one of the reasons why, personal ko lang, why I'm a little bit worried is, yun na nga, we are trading at 9 times PE. Before all of this happened, they were trading at 20 plus, versus an average of 18. So, right now, they're probably at around 18 and a half, 19 times PE, which brings it closer to the average. Okay, but what happens during a bear market? Diba, two things. When there's a bear market, you don't trade at the average multiple. You trade at the lower end of the multiple, which means you want a 16 times PE. And aside from the multiple contraction, you have the EPS growth reduction. So during the start of the year, S&P 500 companies were projected to deliver a 15% EPS growth. Right now, it's 10 to 11%. Pero pati yun, baka maging zero or negative. So in that respect, parang there's still meat for the market to go down. Kasi nga, as you said, it's the secret to life is expectations. 'Di ba? So what were people expecting, 'di ba? Kasi nga when you are trading at 20 times PE, it expects continuous growth, like si Nvidia, 100% EPS growth every year for the next to eternity, no? But, parang ganun siya. Unfortunately, yun na nga, since the expectations are very high, madaling mag-disappoint. May meet pababa. Yun ang concern ko.
Melvin, I have a question for you. No? So you mentioned the risk in the global markets, which includes further escalation of the trade war and maybe a slowdown in the US. How do we mitigate this? Can you expound on that further?
Well, at the end of the day, sabi ko nga kanina, di ba, the key word there is number one, don't look at global as US. US and global is not one. I mean, when you look at global, it's more than US. So I think the first thing that you need to do to mitigate this risk is, okay, go a more diversified approach. So don't just look at US, look at China, look at Europe. Between US, China, and Europe, in fact, I'm more optimistic or more bullish on the China market. So that's the first thing. The second, I also mentioned earlier that, if there's going to be a recession, and as what April mentioned, no, paulit-ulit natin pinag-uusapan na, no, ang pinaka-common denominator nito is interest will go down. So if interest rate go down, anong pinaka-biggest beneficiary dito is the bond market. So again, yes, equity can provide us a good potential upside, but don't just stick to equity. Look at bond as a very good diversifier already of your portfolio.
Okay, sige. So medyo I'll go to the next question, which is I think the most important question. No? So and I think you've already answered a little bit of it, but I want you to expound that. So given everything we talked about so far, so how should investors, right, position themselves, right? What's your bias? Do you prefer, parang medyo sa conclusion na tayo, we're trying to answer the question na, di ba? So is it local or global, fixed income, equities? Can you tell me what your advice would be to our audience today?
Okay, so what I prefer to do is I will tell you what I will most likely do in my portfolio. Yeah, kasi I think that's the best advice, right? So right now, ang goal ko is to do 70% in the bond market. So I'm more biased on the global side rather than on the Philippine side. Though there's nothing wrong in the Philippine market, it's just that sa global, mas malaki kasi yung pool natin dyan, di ba? So, meron akong local bond, meron din akong global, but mas marami yung global side. So, 70% in bonds, and 30% most likely I'll go to the equity market side. So, from there, I'll probably have a more balance more balance on the global and equity. So, do sa 30%, I'll probably do 15% to about 20% in global, whereas sa local 10 to 15% naman. So, more in that area. But if I would to look at the local market, I'll be more biased on stocks that provides very good dividends. Kasi as what April mentioned earlier, sobrang mura talaga ng Philippine market. But it's a waiting game. So, ang gusto ko, while I'm waiting, meron pa rin akong kita. Yan.
So clear. So the bias is for bonds. In terms of equities, correct me if I'm wrong. So for local, more on the defensive side, the dividends. For global, you like it, but you mentioned already. You kept on mentioning slowly, slowly, not tomorrow, not tomorrow. Definitely. Okay. And can I just clarify, because I think that's the problem, kasi the biggest challenge that we have, right, is that every investor will be different. So if you give,
Yes.
so to clarify, the breakdown that you mentioned is for your personal,
Correct.
for yourself, right?
Correct.
So 70-30, 70-15-15,
Correct.
right? That's for yourself. But paano, what if, let's say, there's somebody who's like, let's say 100% local today. Do I just sell 70% tomorrow? How would that work?
So if I'm purely local,
Local equities, for example. Let's say.
so
Hypothetically lang. Let's say I'm 99% local equities.
So kung nasa 100% equity ako ngayon,
Yes.
masabi ko sa'yo, good luck. Nabibiro lang. Okay? So if you're at 100% equity, so regardless if 100% local, 100% global, or a mixture of it, I will already tell you, you have to look at the bond market pa rin. So kung wala kang access to global bond, that's fine, no? There's a lot of global bond that you can go into. And guess what? If you don't have access or you're having difficulty in choosing, my best recommendation to you is at the very least go to a fund. Kasi the fund will now take care of, buying it for you and so on and so forth. And, the biggest advantage of bonds kasi is, funds kasi they have the war chest to buy the bonds eh. Ang problem mo kasi sa bond, yung minimum mo malaki. 'Di ba? So, sabihin mo na lang, meron kang 1 million, that's fine, pero isa lang mabibili mo. You don't have the power of diversifying it, right? So, if you put it in a fund, at least that fund will be able to diversify your investment. Now, sasabihin natin, but if I put it in a fund, will my return be small, etc., etc. Remember, in a bond, most of the time, ang iniisip natin, ang kita mo dyan is yung interest, which is correct. But there's one factor there that will help you and that is the bond prices. So as interest rate goes down, the bond price goes up. So that's what you want to take advantage, yung pag-akyat ng bond price mo, hindi lang yung interest. Okay? Ang impression kasi palagi natin kapag bonds, boring, interest lang. No, that's not true. In fact, if, galing ng prompter. Okay, so in fact, kapag bumagsak ng interest ng 0.75%. In fact, April was even mentioning na 1% na ngayon, di ba? And there's even a 50-50 chance of a 5%, 5 times, di ba? So if that goes down by 1%, ladies and gentlemen, your bond price should go up about 8 to 9%. So ganun kalaki yung akit niya. Mas malaki pa yung akit ng value ng bond mo kaysa dun sa interest. So defensive ka na nga, no? Meron ka pang potential na upside.
Okay, great. So both for defensive, parang risk minimizing, and also for potential gains, kasi beneficiary of everything that we talk about.
Yes.
All right. April, on your end, what's your bias, local or global? I think I kind of know the answer, but
Yeah.
Please feel free to explain.
Siyempre local,
And
diba?
fixed income or equities if you wanna chime in.
Yeah. For me, local market. But again, we cannot discount that we're only a price taker, so contagion risk, etc. Uh, but because of that, I don't think naman we should totally ignore Philippine stocks. That's why I'm recommending a barbell strategy. So this is not something that's new. We've already said that. So I think you can buy some stocks, but at the same time, yun na nga, I think there's also uh, a role for mga defensive issues, such as power companies, those that pay high cash dividends because they will become more attractive as interest rates go down. And then yun nga, bonds, I also agree. It's good to buy that as a buffer. No? Kasi nga, kung pangit naman ng US, hindi rin naman naakit ang Philippines. So, at least meron tayong buffer. And, another strategy that you can think about in case you have, these, bonds or even REITs, when they pay out the coupons or the dividends, you could actually use that to buy your more, I guess, the higher alpha stocks, like yung mga banks ninyo or yung mga iba na baka mabagal umakyat, no? Or yun na nga, let's say yun na nga kanina, the hypothetical na, paano kung naka 100% Philippines ako? So, if you wanna go to the US, what you could do is, sige, nasa Philippines ka, don't sell it right away, but if you get the dividends, you get coupons from your bonds, then maybe you could, I think there's time for you to buy your mga global, equities through mga funds. That would be a good way to think about it rather than all at once ngayon din.
Okay, so I just want to summarize for benefit of our audience. So it seems like we're all agreeing that fixed income has a place in the portfolio, and global equities also has a place in the portfolio, but more gradual, right? Slowly accumulate. So my sorry, I'm lost. I lost my train of thought. Okay, so global funds, global equities slowly accumulate. But in terms of, so Mike, okay, I remember my question now. So is it more just for diversification ba, or is it really because there are also opportunities, right? Do you understand my question?
Yeah.
So is it really just for diversification, or is it also for improving returns? I mean, why do we need to I guess that's my question. Why do we need to do that? Why not just go all in? It seems like, because it seems like the local equity seems like parang yun yung pinaka less affected, right? So why even bother going to the US equities or global equities, for example, or yeah, even the fixed income?
Yeah, so ganito. So if you look at why I did a 70-30, in fact, it's very related to what April mentioned earlier. So you know why don't you do this? The 70% that is in bonds produces returns, coupons, right? Why don't you do this? Yung coupons, yung kinikita mo dun sa bonds na yun ang unti-unti mo ngayon ilagay sa US market mo. So that way, you'll be able to cap your capital. So mapapreserve mo pa rin yung capital mo. But this time, you're now taking advantage of the upside of the US market once it starts reversing. Now, at the end of the day, bakit ko sinasabi na don't put everything now, but consider start going back even in the US market? Because the US market is still the most efficient market. So at the end of the day, pag bumalik na pag natapos na yung brouhaha na to, you expect the US market to start going up again. So what you're doing now is defensive, but at the same time, you're now positioning yourself in a good potential upside moving forward.
Yeah, I can add to that. Like, even though I have a Philippine bias right now, the reason why we should consider the US is, I mean, think about it. It's the biggest market. So if I have something new happening and I want to raise capital, you go to the US kasi mas nandun yung pera di ba? Because it's a bigger market. So think about it, the past several years we've had, di ba mga tech issues, then AI. They have everything. Plus, the different instruments are there. That in the Philippines, you don't have that. And all the investors are in the US. So, may ganun eh. That's why you also want to invest there. Yun na nga, a big chunk of the capital in the world is in the US because of the liquidity of the market, the size of the market. So, it would be good to also be there.
All right, all right. So before we move on to the next part, no, so I like to ask, kasi ngayon lang natin nga actually na-mention yung AI, no? That's how crazy the world is. So, thoughts on AI? Kasi even before all this, tariffs, nagkaroon din ng scare, di ba, in terms of AI, like with DeepSeek and then NVIDIA going down. So, do you have like thoughts on the AI play? Tapos na ba? What's your view?
Ironically, it's not. No? In fact, it's just the beginning. When you look at AI kasi, lahat ng mga nakikita nyo so far na AI is exactly yung tinatawag natin na sa enabling and intelligence stage pa lang eh. So companies like ASML, Palantir, Tokyo Electron, sila yung gumagawa. Okay, so they're what we call as the enabling stage or layer. So nandun pa lang tayo. And to some extent, do sa intelligence layer. Wala pa tayo sa application layer. In fact, if you I just read an article just recently, no? Because of AI, hindi pa ganun ka-advance yung AI natin, yung patents natin significantly went up already because of AI. Diba? So this will definitely continue. And ang view ko kasi sa AI is, even with everything that's happening now, it's more resilient than a lot of the other industries. Kasi siya, regardless kung mag-recession yan o hindi, the big companies will continue to invest in AI. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I just want to add lang, no, as far as that is concerned. Medyo, caveat. Let's rewind everything and go back to the dot-com bubble in 2000. Again, expectations, valuations. Di ba, nung early 2000, naalala ko pati yung pets.com, anything.com will go up substantially. So, unfortunately, the past year or year and a half, anything AI-related went up substantially. Unfortunately, again, as Melvin has said, how do we unlock the value of, or how do you monetize this? Ngayon, puro capex tayo. Development, it really is amazing. The problem is we don't know how do we capitalize on AI, who's gonna be the biggest player, who's gonna be your next, say, Amazon or Microsoft. But that said, remember before, when the dot-com bubble happened, it took a very long time. I think more than 10 years after the price of these dot-com darlings, recovered again. So, yun nga, it might take a while for, these AI companies that, went up substantially to, again, if they go down, to recover. It could happen. I don't know for sure.
Right. Very great point. Okay. So before I open the floor to questions from the audience, no, so I'd like to share a slide on how we could participate, because we mentioned already, diba, we like fixed income, we like local equities, but also global equities has a place. So I think we have a slide, the next slide, no, sorry, the previous slide. One more. All right, this one. So I'd like to share this one, because maybe a lot of you know COL as only a local equities broker, right? So we'd also like to share, for those who are not aware yet, that we could also participate in bonds and equities through COL. We have bond funds in our mutual fund site, right? So some example of bond funds that you could buy to have exposure to fixed income would be the ones shown here, the bond funds. For global equities, we also have those. I think the Dragon Growth Equity Feeder Fund is a China fund, right? And the second one, the Prosperity World Equity Index Fund, is an all-country fund. right? So that's exposure to the world. Of course, 65% of that is US. But yeah, so there are ways to perceive it. Of course, for local equities, you could either buy, April's Calling the Shots picks or the CSG, the one managed by CMI, uh, or a subsidiary of COL. Right? So there are ways for us to participate even directly through the COL site. So just FYI lang, don't wanna hard sell, but we
Can I add? Siyempre,
Yeah.
nag-hard sell naman.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Hindi, for me
Ikaw
lang,
pa naman.
the reason why it's important to consider funds is, again, Melvin had mentioned if you wanna go direct to, say, bonds, you need millions. Ngayon, paano na yan? Kung yung dividend mo or yung, yung coupon mo, few thousand pesos lang. So that's the beauty of having these funds. You could actually buy them only for a few thousand pesos. You don't need a lot of money to buy them. That's why you may consider buying them and, automatically diversified. Now, let's assume the reverse na most of your money is in bonds because, you're a high net worth and, you're trying to get your feet wet on equities. Again, ang corny naman kung isang stock lang bibili mo. For example, in the Philippines, again, you can buy the COL Strategic Growth Equity Fund, which is already automatically diversified. And the best part is that our fund managers will be the ones to take care of, diba, buying low, selling high, Kasi ngayon, another thing that, I've been talking about since the start of the year is we think that active investing has it's going to be more profitable compared to passive investing right now. And
What do you mean, boss, by active investing?
yeah, stock picking. Hindi pwedeng bibili na lang ako ng index. I will just replicate it. Because, for example, last year, if you look at the performance of the PSEI, it's up by 1%. Ganun?
1.2.
Up, 1.2. But if you look at the breakdown of the index, you have so many stocks that actually went up by more than 30%. But, if you just follow the index, parang ang badoy, 1%, ano ba yan, di ba? Yun. So, kailangan may active component right now. So, what's happening, for example, companies that are doing well can go up substantially. For example, Converge last year was up almost 100%. Then you have the index additions like A-REIT, China Bank, which went up substantially. So, talagang may role ang active fund manager who is familiar with all of this. Tapos yun nga, yung mga out of favor, yung mga tinanggal sa index, ang laki rin ng binaba. So, yun.